This is probably one of the worst people I've talked about to date. We're talking about another serial killer from Alaska. We're talking about Israel Keyes today. He was a serial killer, bank robber, arsonist, burglar, kidnapper, offender, murderer, the list goes on. So he was born in Richmond, Utah on January 7th of 1978. His parents' names were Heidi and John Jeffrey Keyes. He was the second oldest kid, and he ended up having 9 siblings. So just to give you an idea of what his family and childhood was like, his family was extremely religious. His siblings were all homeschooled for a long time, and then they went to a church at one point called the Ark, which was a white supremacy Christian identity church. So they were all about Anglo-Saxon supremacy, white supremacy. They were all about that. And it was very, very like Amish-like, very controlling, very close-minded. And this was while they lived in Colville, Washington. And at one point, the family even becomes friends through the church with a man named Chevy Cahoe. If you don't know who he is now serving 3 life sentences for murdering and torturing a family. Which, them becoming friends with him just feels like foreshadowing for what their son ends up doing. At their home, they lived in a tiny cabin, and it was so small that not all the kids could fit in it, so most of them slept outside in tents, and then they had to hunt for themselves, they had to cut wood for themselves, they had to find their own food, like they had to fend for themselves essentially, and then they also had to go get jobs to support the family. They all grew up in a really extreme childhood and really not a lot of structure, so they had a lot of like aggressive ideals and racism and stuff like that, but then they didn't have a lot of like regular structure that a child needs to develop. He really liked to go hunting, and he would hunt anything with a heartbeat. He said that so proudly in his interviews later on in life. He was so proud of the fact that he could hunt anything, and he loved to kill things. And when he was like 14, he was starting fires in people's homes, shooting BB guns at people's houses. And so already by age 14, he's an arsonist and like terrorizing different families. He also would threaten kids. He would break into homes. He at one point stole a bunch of guns from a home and then was selling them to adults, which what adult in their right mind is buying guns from a 14-year-old who has like all these different guns? How did the 14-year-old get guns? I feel like you should be asking questions before you're just buying guns from a child. When he was 14, family friends came to visit his family, and Israel tied a cat to a tree, tortured it, and the detail, like I was gonna try to repeat the details, but like it made me sick to my stomach. I'm not going to. But he essentially tortured a cat, and then when the other kids started to vomit because there are other kids there, he was laughing and taunting them for throwing up, and he was just having the time of his life. Animal, and then also torturing the kids watching. 16, he kept a diary. He would talk about feeling shame for thoughts of lust towards his girlfriend. He talked about how he felt a lot of shame for different things with like religion and stuff like that. And then he also talked about how responsible he was for the other kids. He took care of them. He would try to provide for them. A lot of the other kids looked up to him, and he is trying to hunt for the family, get odd jobs to provide for the family. And at age 16, he becomes a really good carpenter and builds an entire log cabin for his family. At this age, he's starting to socialize, or trying to, and he's starting to notice how different from other kids he is. They don't all have these violent tendencies. They don't all want to just murder everything they see. They aren't always trying to get in trouble or start fires or hurt other kids. So he's realizing he doesn't fit in, and he starts to isolate himself. So now we have a young kid who has violent tendencies, is faced with extreme amounts of control and shame. So he's trying to suppress the feelings he's having because of this control and shame, and it's just making them manifest more. In 1997, the family moved from where he grew up to Maine, where they started collecting sap for maple syrup, and they were mostly selling this to the Amish community. So they ended up living in a predominantly Amish community. Again, very extreme, strict religion. His mom didn't allow the kids to play with friends, watch TV, play instruments even, let them have electricity. They didn't use modern medicine. It was like they were living in like the 1800s. So Israel spent his whole childhood trying to please his family. He didn't fit in, but he wanted to take care of them. Eventually, he announced that he didn't believe in God, and he told this to his very religious parents, who he had spent his whole life trying to protect and provide for and just make them happy. And they immediately kicked him out and told the siblings that he had cared for and that they looked up to him, they were banned from ever seeing him again. So obviously this caused him to be more angry. So he started becoming interested in Satanism, and he had desires to practice a ritualistic murder. One of the first documented cases we have of him being violent is in 1998. He violently essayed a little girl. We think she was about 14, but we don't know for sure. She's never identified. He wanted to have her for his ritualistic murder, but as he was essaying her and then getting ready to kill her, he had like a moment of weakness and he let her go. And he said in that moment he knew he was never going to let someone go again. He was never going to have a moment of weakness when it came to killing again. On July 9th of 1998, he is 20 and he enlists in the army after moving to New York. He is known to keep to himself and he drinks heavily. Eventually got a DUI in 2001 and he very much relies on alcohol to cope with things. He lives in Washington after getting out of the army. He meets a woman and then they eventually have a kid, and then after that he moves up to Alaska with his daughter. So we have seen throughout his life so far, he has been violent, nasty, he loves to kill, he loves to hunt. He has fun watching people like retch at the idea of torturing things. He loves the idea that he's different. He loves the idea that he gets to scare other people and that other people could be terrified of him. This is the most notes I've ever had on a case. There is so much to unpack. There's so much that he did. This is going to be a longer series, so go to part 2. It's going to be up right after this video.
If you've ever seen Parks and Rec or King of the Hill, you likely recognize this man. He voiced a very popular character, John Redcorn, in King of the Hill. He also was in Parks and Rec for 5 years, also has been in many other things like Tulsa King and Abduction of the Fourth Kind. His name is Jonathan Joss, and he was killed 3 days ago in front of his home in Texas. Allegedly, he was shot by his neighbor, who has been identified as Sigfredo Alvarez Ceja. Pretty immediately, this is being assumed to be some sort of hate crime. Jonathan was allegedly shot by the neighbor in front of his home in San Antonio, and his husband was present at the time, and he made a statement online giving like a recount and retelling of what happened. And he says that the reason this occurred is because his neighbor was homophobic and that this was essentially a hate crime. The police say at this point they don't know that that's true, but obviously people online are definitely thinking it is. Jonathan's husband said that the man who shot him said a homophobic slur in Spanish after he had shot him. It sounds like there's a long history of issues between these neighbors and Jonathan and his husband, and maybe other neighbors as well. As of about an hour ago, one source does say that the man that shot him has been released from jail. There's not a lot of information on that, and I don't know 100% if that's true. 3 months before he was killed, his childhood home that he had been living in burned down with their 3 dogs inside. And Jonathan's husband in his statement said that one of their dog's skulls had been left for them to find, and that they had been under a lot of emotional distress over this. And there had even been a GoFundMe made to help try to get them back on their feet. And then less than 3 months after this happened, he was shot and killed. Jonathan was 59 when he was shot and killed. People described him as incredibly generous and kind, and a lot of people said he always stopped to give autographs or talk to fans whenever someone approached him. Nick Offerman, who you know from Parks and Rec, made a statement. He said, quote, "Jonathan